To understand how the album Cold came to be, you'll have to kind of go back in time to June 1995. So Mike and I moved from Arizona to Northeast Ohio to live with Tara at her parents' house. It was a really beautiful sort of atmosphere, really rural. We lived a few miles away from a truck stop. Across the street from the house was a cornfield and an old cemetery. It made for really cool surrounding. Shortly after we moved, we began rehearsals for the live shows that we would be doing here across the East Coast. After the first few shows, it became fairly clear that tensions were rising. I was a 24-year-old kid with anger issues, self-esteem issues, and poor sense of communication. And all that added up to tension and friction within the band. Playing live didn't help either. It was a constant battle to try to get a good sound every night. I think out of maybe 15 or 20 shows, we may have had 2 good shows. And I don't know if that's attributed to just terrible sound people or whether we had fairly little experience playing live. Probably both. Throughout the tour, their tension began to grow between myself and Mike and Tara. Began to sort of lash out at them, and we all started lashing out at each other at some point in time. And the stress of just touring in a small car together began to overwhelm us. I was slowly becoming alienated from them, and as a result, I sort of began to withdraw from them as well. They were very concerned that I was just going to quit in the middle of the tour. And the more tension that grew, the more I felt sort of pushed aside and alienated, and the less I cared about playing live. It was during this time that we discussed recording the next album, and Mike had proposed that we write all the songs together as a band. But I think by the time we got around August, he felt that I was going to probably be gone before the next album was recorded. So Mike and Tara began to start writing songs for Cold, essentially, without me. And when I heard this, it sort of reassured my feelings of being pushed out of the band. And by the time we got to August, it was fairly evident that I wasn't going to stay long. And they had given me a choice to continue doing more shows with them. And I decided to stop doing live shows. Really, in the end, it was just this sort of accumulation of negativity that I had. And I just brought a whole bunch of drama that Mike and Tara didn't really need. And, I hated touring. I hated playing shows. It felt like just a battle every night. And it was just taking its toll on me personally. And of course, I wasn't smart enough to communicate that with Mike. I just kind of hold it all in and get angry. So by October of 95, we moved into an apartment together in Streetsboro, and they prepared the next group of shows that were going to be opening up for Typo Negative. They left to do the shows, and I stayed and set up the studio and prepared it for recording the Cold album. After the tour, when they got back, I think we took off like a month or so, and we spent some time kind of organizing the music, or they sort of organized the music they had previously written during the summer. And we began recording, I believe, in December or January. I think it was January. My concern was record it in the best possible way with the equipment that we had at the time. It was a Tascam 688, which was recorded everything on cassette tapes. It was on 8 tracks. So I took the 8th track, striped it with SMPTE code, and then I would synchronize it was a Macintosh 2VX running Deck 2 software, which gave me 4 digital tracks, so a total of 11 tracks, 7 analog and 4 digital. And this ended up actually working really well until the capstan motors of the 688 started wearing out, in which case you can hear sort of the problems in, I think, some of the later songs on the album. I quickly wrote my 2 songs, which were December and Colder, and then I had probably a couple more songs that I had started working on. One of them has just been recently completed and released on the new album in Flickers. We got along very well when we were working on the album. There was no tensions at all. Everything worked quite well. We work quite well all the time when we're in the studio. I believe most of the feeling of the Cold album is sort of reflective of the change of the scenery and the change of the atmosphere. Really, if you compare it between Arizona and then where we were in Northeast Ohio, where we were living, our living room window opened up to this huge field surrounded by trees. And by the time it was January, sunlight was relatively short throughout the day, and it was mostly dark and overcast and snowy and icy. And I think a lot of that had to do with the overall tone of the album. I believe, there was some of that was from the tensions from our live shows, but I believe the most massive effect was the just change of atmosphere for us. The recordings went quite well, and we recorded it relatively quickly. If you were to put all the time we put in recording it together, I'm sure it would be less than 2 weeks. Mike and Tara were working, I believe, a 3rd shift job. I was working like a 1st, 2nd shift job. So occasionally, when we had like one day off where we'd have time to work on it, we would get together and spend time producing it. I don't even really remember the recording process that much, other than just how it was set up. We have streamlined the way we record, and it's really easy for us to sort of put together songs when we're together. A little bit different now when we're bouncing things back and forth through the internet. After the recording was done, we continued working our jobs throughout spring, and by June, I was broke. And I felt that probably the best idea for me would be to move back to Arizona and just kind of continue doing whatever I do. And it's sort of a decision I've come to regret. I wish that I had just remained and worked through it and continued on working with Mike and Tara and Lycia. But it was one of those things, I was scared. I had no money. My first reaction was to just go back home. And I never really wanted to quit the band, but it was just sort of a necessity for me at the time. And the last day, I remember just packing up U-Haul, and Mike and Tara just kind of stayed in the room, and I left. So that's pretty much it. A lot happened in a period of 1 year, but it was a really interesting experience. And out of all of that came a really, really cool album, a really nice album. I'm really proud of it. I'm really glad that people really enjoy it. So, anyways, that's that. Thanks for listening to my nonsense.